Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com. How you doing, guys? Welcome. This is episode 301 and it kind of feels like a new era for the show, coming off the back of the big 300th episode with Austin Kleon, which I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on that. I would love to hear them. Ben at bentalon.com. It's the best way to get in touch and share those with me. I adored that conversation. Austin was full of the magic that I've come to love through this crusade of exploring creativity over all this time. So I thought I'd take some time to reflect upon this first chunk of what is likely going to be a lifelong journey for me. As long as I'm able, as long as the infrastructure in the world permits, as long as we don't go over the cliff as a collective, then I'll be here in this little shed or somewhere similar, doing this, talking to you guys, talking to people to try to further reveal new aspects of the human condition, truths that we can all learn from and apply to our own practice, our own creativity, our own contribution to the work that we're here to do on this world. How are you guys? Monday morning as I record this, kicking up the beginning of a severe heat wave here in the UK. Again, the climate crisis reminding us that this is here, this is now, this is our fight. This is something we all need to be mindful of when we choose to use AI and resource-hungry technology. It's one of the reasons I don't use it anywhere. I think I've used ChatGPT 13 times now. I used it late last week for a coaching-related thing that was going to help me with some structure to help people moving forward. A very small considered use. That's the only time I will touch it until I trust that it's not to do with the reason my local river is trickling at, of just a few inches, alarmingly low. I did a history walk yesterday with my family, Father's Day thing, and the lady who did the tour has done the tour for some time. I would guess she was maybe in her 80s, late 70s perhaps, and she'd never seen it so low. And when I see that kind of, I've never known it to be this hot, I've never seen the river to be so low, I sent myself into many tailspins, many mental rabbit holes over the last few years in particular, which has led to some severe anxiety on my part, eco-anxiety in particular. But then, of course, that opens up, a depleted brain power. And it's just taken me on this odyssey of overthinking, of overwhelm, of not being able to manage my thoughts on a daily basis. And I've managed that whole time to stagger through, to keep growing creatively, to keep bringing this content to you. And it's been a learning journey that I'm very grateful for. I'll get into that a little bit because it ties in with reflecting on the 300 episodes of doing this podcast. But it is alarming and it is here and it is scary. I heard a psychologist talking about this and said we are scared monkeys, we're frightened monkeys, where a lot of us are living out of an alarm state, a scarcity mindset. And it narrows our thinking. If anything I've learned about the anxiety over the last few years, it's that it narrows your field of vision, your thinking, your ability to be optimistic, to be expansive in our visions and our thinking and our creativity. And that leads to just getting by, to getting the minimum done each day, to staving, keeping the wolf from the door, to making the money we need to make, and then just collapsing in a kind of exhausted emotional state. And that's something that I've become very familiar with over these last 3 years. And thankfully now, thanks to a combination of therapy, but more importantly, deep inner work that I've been doing myself, a lot of listening, a lot of reading, a lot of internal thought and coming to terms with my bigger beliefs and my position on all of this. And I am in a better place now as we get into midway through 2026. It's taken a year of that work for me to even start to feel something deeper in there that is helpful. The work around this podcast is of a personal passion. This is my life's work. I'll get into that shortly and talk about why. That's why I wanted to do this episode. I wanted to sort of talk about why not. Why are you holding yourself back from the thing that you want to do, that wants to, make you get out of bed in the morning? We all have to do our day jobs. I'm very stacked at the moment with illustration work that I'm very grateful for. But there are days when I just can't find the energy or the headspace to think about the longer term, the bigger picture, where I want to take this story of mine. We're all the author of our own lives, and what is the next chapter I want to write? And there are some days with a bit more headspace, and I realise it's not just about making the money through illustration. I want that to always be a part of what I do. But I want to tell stories, and what are those stories, and who do I want to tell them with, and who's going to be my co-author, who are going to be the characters in those stories, and all of us should be thinking about that. So that's why I wanted to do this episode today, to talk about the importance of doing the thing that you want to do. We'll get there in a moment. A quick thank you to the founding sponsor of the show who's made this possible, Illustration X. They've been here since day one. Big supporter of the creative industry, protectors of our rights in this industry, done a lot of work on IP around AI and been a big voice in that sector, and continue to do great work, which you can learn about, along with seeing all the global illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. Welcoming back to the show Foilco, beautiful foilers. They work out of Warrington in the northwest UK, but truly globally. Their warehouse, their setup is so well considered. It's zero waste. It's incredible to see it happening. Family run business. Matt from Foilco and I became good friends, and he's been a supporter of what I'm doing ever since. We've kept in touch, and it's a joy to have them back on board. So if you need anything foiling, book covers, business cards, promo material, you name it, they do it, and they do it so well with the highest level of professionalism, working with all the paper companies in the UK and beyond. So check them out, foilco.com, for that work. You can learn a lot more. Paradiso Institute doing incredibly important work around creative leadership and voices. They're helping to enable people to be bold, to be brave in their creativity, to find the point of view, and through their own coaching opportunities and the festival and all the great stuff they're doing, the multifaceted content, well worth a look. paradisoinstitute.org. And last but certainly not least, the Ukrainian Institute, who I've been shouting about since I learned about their incredible work. ui.org.ua, they support and champion the creative community in Ukraine in this horrible time of war. If you can't get behind that cause, it's a poor do, so give them a shout out. Check it out, ui.org.ua. Shout about some of their artists, share some work, tell a friend. If you're in a position to commission somebody, then even better. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. We hit episode 300 last week with Austin Kleon. If you haven't heard the episode, please do go back and check that one out. It's inspiring stuff. It's a mantra for our times. It's about getting back something we surrendered when we left childhood in terms of our imagination, our creativity, and our bravery, and playing and trying and growing as we make, not waiting for the ideas or the epiphanies or the logic to come and sign off on something that we want to do from the heart. So when Harry Lyon Smith suggested podcasting to me back in 2015, I sort of laughed at first, but it really rang. It hit something. It resonated somewhere deep, because, well, I was listening to about 20 podcasts a week, usually wrestling ones, occasionally, something around design or creativity, but mainly wrestling, football here and there. I've never been afraid to follow those, those innocent passions, those playful passions that make me feel alive and energised. Sorry guys, Monday morning, a big yawn for the show. But when he suggested it because I was always talking about creativity, and I'd come to him to suggest that I might be able to do something in media, because Champagne and Wax Crayons, my debut book, Another Leap of Faith, had just come out, published by Lid Publishing back in 2015. And I loved the opportunities it was winning me in terms of talking at universities, at design festivals, of getting out there and being a voice and contributing a point of view in that regard. So when he said that, it just stirred something unignorable in me, and I had to deny that logical brain which was saying to me, well, what do you know? Why should you be holding a microphone? Who have you interviewed in the past? Now, I had interviewed a sprinkling of people for my voluntary awareness campaign for the Campaign Against Living Miserably, which is a charity here in the UK that actively works to prevent suicide, focusing on males because the stats are weighted against men, who are, it seems, more likely to bite their tongue, I should say, stiff upper lip and all that stuff. And it leads to severe mental health trauma and, sadly, a lot of suicide. So I'd run that campaign and we had no budget to pay anybody to do the interviews with the people that we've got access to. So Danny Dyer, actor here in the UK, Stephen Merchant, comedian, actor, writer, very talented bloke, Mick Foley, former WWE champion, professional wrestler, also very creative and a really interesting human. Ken Garland, a personal design hero of mine who wrote the First Things First manifesto in the 60s, which I'd studied at university and then got the opportunity to interview for this too. And as these were growing, we like I said, we didn't have a budget, so I jumped in because I liked to talk to people. I thought I might have an untrained way of doing it that might go in my favour. Turns out that was the case, and I fell in love with the interview process. So when Harry suggested it, I had a little bit of previous, I'd built a little bit of a success record, enough for me to jump in the deep end and learn from some kids on GarageBand and do it very rudimentary, which has stayed the way ever since. The first episode I remember doing on my parents' bedroom floor to try and get some, get that sound absorbed by the carpet and the bedding that was there in the room and the curtains. And I interviewed Danny Allison, who was a very close friend of mine. I'd shared studios with over the years and was something of a mentor to me. And it was the chance to work with some psychological safety in the first episode so that if I screwed things up, Danny wasn't going to lynch me or call me out or make me feel unprofessional. But it wasn't the case. We had a wonderful conversation way back on episode 1 and it set the ball rolling. That kind of, I had a little Zoom microphone there on the carpet. I'd only just learned how to use it. I didn't even know if I was using the right channels on it. To this day, I sometimes doubt that, but it's good enough. And what's even better is my way of doing things, because I've always trusted my unique way of presentation, of talking, of drawing, of writing, and so should you. Because when you use your story, when you step into that story, is something I've been developing through my story coaching practice recently, and helping people to book coaching people, to help them to write their memoirs and they're sharing their knowledge, or even just writing their story for themselves as a compass. Check all that stuff out at thecreativecondition.com/coach. There's also a story coaching page on there. Have a look. But lo-fi was fine. That's what I came to realise. There was a degree of forgiveness. I wasn't the BBC. You only have to look at my art style to see it's a reflection of who I am as a personality. I'm very haphazard. I'm very disorganised in some ways. Never missed a tax return, never missed a deadline. But in terms of managing my, files and keeping my studio in order, I'm a shambles, because I've got one of those brains that might be ADHD. I haven't had a diagnosis. There's certainly tendencies. That's as far as I'll go with that one. But I have got that chaotic, creative brain. It's very stereotypical in our industry. It's very common. I remember having to crash a Travelodge lobby with Kerry Lemon when I interviewed Kerry. She's a force of nature as a wonderful multidisciplinary artist, and I just had to interview her. We met in central London. I had the mic and said, let's just find somewhere. It's Kerry's suggestion, but we ended up going into a Travelodge lobby where we weren't staying, and I thought if we look confident enough with this microphone on the table, no one's going to interrupt us, and nobody did, and we did it. Again, the sound quality wasn't studio quality doing that, but the listeners enjoyed the story, and that's what I put more value on. I remember interviewing Ashley Axios, who had been, creative director and digital strategist in the Obama White House administration, working directly with Barack. And, this is crazy, but I interviewed her with my microphone balanced on top of some bins down the side of where D&AD Festival was at the Truman Brewery on Brick Lane in London. Crazy stuff, but she loved it, and it was something different, and people go with what your thing is. That's what I've come to learn. Didn't always pay off. I remember being called out by a couple of listeners for the poor quality of my interview with Sean Ryder, Happy Mondays frontman. Sean had quite a nervous tick when he was tapping on the table with his hands, and I hadn't realised just how much that was likely to be interfering with the audio. Like someone banging a drum the whole time while we're having this conversation. Now, I think there was enough there to persevere with it, but some people disagreed and actually stopped listening to the podcast, and they're justified in doing that, because that was an example of it not paying off. The lo-fi thing, that I should have had the bravery to sort of apprehend what Sean was doing and ask him to stop for the quality of the interview, but I was worried that I'd derail his flow. It was an artistic gamble and decision at the time that didn't pay off. It's one of very few regrets that I have of this show, but the interview is still there. I still think it's worth a listen. Episode X4. But it was what it was. I learned when listeners would email and say, sometimes you talk over your guests a little too much. Now, in the earliest stages of this podcast, when I got a quiet guest scared the shit out of me, because humans abhor a vacuum, don't they? Or is it, what's the expression anyway? We abhor silence, and we often feel the need to keep talking to fill the void, and that's what I felt when I had a quiet guest. So I would be great with the likes of Sean Ryder, Danny Allison, people who had bravado and had some charisma, or a different kind of charisma, a louder charisma. I was fine with those characters because I grew up in Keighley, a very raucous, post-industrial mill town. But those quiet guests scared me, and I would overcompensate. I would talk too much, and it was thanks to the criticism, constructive criticism of certain listeners, that helped me to overcome that. I'm now more comfortable with that silence, and I'm happy to cut that interview down to 15 minutes if that's what it needs to be, because of the way the guest is. I remember being in Brooklyn with Miss Led, feeling very melancholy about coming back home that same afternoon, but I went to do an interview with her in her apartment. We'd met once because we were both represented by Illustration X and were part of the same live exhibition, but I didn't know Jo. But immediately we found a real flow in our conversation. We've remained good friends ever since. I've had Jo on the show 3, maybe 4 times now, I think. Jo is also now a coach for female creatives. She's brilliant at that. Go and check out the work she's doing. Jo Henley, formerly Miss Led. Also an amazing artist, and you develop these relationships over a period of doing a podcast over 11 years. You have repeat guests and you check in with people. It's almost like coaching in some regard. You spend an hour with them getting deep into topics that you probably wouldn't have the chance to do if it was just small talk. So this is another reason why you should go for the thing you want to do. Who cares if it's not going to pay the bills? Who cares if it's not going to grow into something that you can say was amazing? Just by doing it and expressing that emotional creativity, you will grow in some way. You will form these relationships. At times, I've been completely intellectually flattened by my guests. I remember being quite scared interviewing Mariana Pastana, who was the curator at the V&A Museum in London. Professor Anna Abraham, a neuroscientist. Athena Actopis, another professor at Arizona State University, studying humans in apocalypse situations. These sort of guests would intimidate me so much more than the rock stars, but these have gone on to become the people I now really consider they're the rock stars, because they're working on common issues that affect us all, whether it's the climate or other kinds of apocalypses, And Abraham, talking about flow states. I got to learn a lot about forward motion and flow states, which I've used to build my coaching practice, which was prominent in my second non-fiction book, The Creative Condition, thanks to Anna. Mariana Pastana, talking about the future of design at the time when I interviewed her at the V&A, in this grand setting with this person who was working with such loftier material than I was, and yet there was no ego whatsoever. She was wonderful and the interview went great. I learned over time where I should sit in any given interview, to step off and to accept sometimes it's fine to be the naive idiot and ask the basic questions. And if you acknowledge your lack of knowledge with certain people, they will meet you halfway and they will be very welcoming, and you will get a better conversation than if you're trying to pretend like you know exactly what they're talking about, what you're doing in that conversation. To surrender sometimes is really important. Over time, I've tried to be playful with this show. The art direction has changed dramatically. I will create one-off posters. I will rebrand the show, change the name a number of times. It began as Arrest All Mimics. It became Arrest All Mimics, the Creative Innovation Podcast. Too long sometimes, and eventually just the Creative Condition, because I wanted people to amble across it and go, oh, Creative Condition, okay, that sounds like something I'm interested in. Whether it's right, I'll never know. The listenership has ebbed and flowed over the years. It's been growing again recently. It's wonderful to get that. But truly, it's only ever stayed moderate. But because I'm stretched too many ways as a parent of 2 young children and an illustrator and a creative coach, and I do a lot, So this has been a vehicle for me to just grow as a human, being playful with interviews like Liam Gall, a young lad who was 10 at the time, and he was doing knockoff Disney cartoons and selling them in his playground at school for 20p and 50p, and he had late fees for people who didn't pay up on time, and I just loved that enterprise. So I asked my close friend Shane if it was okay to interview him, and he said it's up to him. If he wants to be interviewed, then go for it. Yeah, it's fine. He knew I'd be responsible in the way that I carried out that interview, and he was very innocent, very naive. It was very sweet, this young Yorkshire kid talking about his ideas, and I just love giving the floor to not just the icons and the legends that I've been lucky enough to interview, but, people still studying, people with an idea who are children and things like that. This is just a floor for people to come and share aspects of the human condition and creativity, and that's what those personal passion projects can do, and again, why you should do them. when I look around at the competition, there's Katie Cowan doing an awesome job with a platform way bigger than the Creative Condition over at Creative Boom. But Katie has been very supportive of everything I've ever done. She's always featured my books. She'll champion this podcast. I'll champion her podcasts. The same with Radim Malanich over at Daring Creativity. Radim is a powerhouse in terms of his book releases. He's got Daring Creativity, a new one coming up soon. Of course, on a weekday, feeling tired, sometimes you look and you get that, go a little green with envy and think, oh, God, he's killing it over there and he's doing an amazing job. But then you go, well, yeah, but that's Radim doing Radim. I'm doing me over here, so it's fine. And you support each other and build this ecosystem. And I think the same has to be said with the giants of the podcasting world, like Debbie Millman and Blind Boy over at the Blind Boy podcast. These are my contemporaries, and I find that is incredibly invigorating and exciting. And then go back a few episodes and listen to the Your Universe episode. That's a coaching tool that I use to help people feel a part of their contemporary movement, because we're all lonely. Loneliness is a sickness of our time. And I think if you look around and look at the collective and the movement that you are actually a part of, it doesn't matter whether you're starting out and feeling inferior, it doesn't matter whether you've been in the game 40 years and you're considered a master in your field. To look around is essential. As humans, we need collectivity and connection and community. And if you look around and recognise that you are part of a contemporary artistic creative movement, even if it's people you don't know, you are here on this planet at the same time as those people. And that's important because we all have collective power and influence. So that universe tool is really about that. And I felt that. So I feel kinship with Debbie Millman, even though I've never spoken to her. I feel kinship with Blind Boy. I've never spoken to him. They're all a part of my ecosystem, and it makes me want to do this more, and especially more in my own way. But over time, what I wanted to do with this, and the reason I've done it for 11 years, is that I simply want to learn as much about creativity and muster enough courage to walk into global unrest and economic turbulence and environmental chaos with a mind of wonder and curiosity, not the fear that has been dominant in my life over the last few years. This show has always been a pure expression, pure self-expression, a curiosity crusade, if you will. And I want each of you to have that. We have to remain inherently curious and to follow it where it will take us. Trust it. Doing something for passion's sake and not forcing yourself to justify everything as a way of aligning you with forward motion and flow in a way that invites opportunity and the chance, to do new things, to make the right steps. The writing of the Creative Condition book was a story of pure serendipity. I abandoned ship on that one after writing 50,000 words of a manuscript when literally my confidence dropped out on the train. I remember not even finishing a sentence and closing my laptop lid and not coming back to the book for 5 years. That's how drastically my confidence fell. And it took me 5 years to realise that I wasn't ready to tell the story that I needed to tell. I hadn't lived enough life. I hadn't talked to enough people through the work I was doing yet. Didn't know that at the time. Questioned my ability to be writing books anymore. Didn't come back for a while. Suffered some real imposter syndrome there. But when I did, I was washing up at the sink during that lovely period between Christmas and New Year when you get a little time off and you get to just think, process, reflect, do nothing for a little bit. And boom, out of my subconscious comes this fully formed book. I shit you not. At the time, I thought it was going to be a very short, sort of pamphlet-sized book, but it evolved into a chunk of a book, 370-something pages, exploring creativity as a biography. It was just pulling all of this work together. But the moment I started writing that book, it flowed. And the serendipity and the people who came into my life by complete chance, by a random conversation on the dog walk, or somebody I didn't know lived close by would just appear and would be doing something or could connect me with a person or inspire me in a certain way. And that just kept going for the whole 2.5 years. And whenever I do this forward motion work, like I said, not just going back into old fear patterns and just reverting back to shit, I need to just email people that can pay me to do illustration. It's like, no, live as your inner artist and live with a purity and be responsive and give yourself the freedom to feel those feelings and go that way. When you do that, it really is amazing how synchronicity happens around you. And that has been a tool to help me out of this anxiety spiral, to trust in the unknown and go, well, it feels terrifying today thinking where the next job's going to come from. But if I just sit here biting my nails and getting myself into another sleepless night, well, it's going to happen, isn't it? The fear's going to happen. But if I find a way to be joyful and be curious in the moment and be present, then no, actually maybe optimism will return and I'll actually start creating again and seeing the world through optimistic eyes and being attuned to that synchronicity and that serendipity, and then it goes another way, and actually you give yourself a far better chance of turning the tide, even though it doesn't feel logically likely. Beware that sort of pragmatism and that data-obsessed approach to should I, shouldn't I? I think the answer is always yes. When you feel it in your heart, move forward and be vulnerable. I've chosen to be publicly vulnerable in sharing with you guys my own struggles because I'm comfortable in doing so. That fits my personality. If you're not, that's fine. Maybe you could find more subversive ways of doing it through art, through abstract art, through journaling to yourself and just talking to the right people who you feel comfortable enough in a quiet environment. It's different for every single person. Bravery comes in many forms. So does confidence, and so do all the other things. They all go through the lens of our personalities. To lead with creativity is to commit to the unknown, and yet our brain demands certainty. So the deficit in between that is the basis of bad short-term panic decisions and a lot of fear, which narrows our field of vision. Like I mentioned at the start of the show, you only see the world through survival mode because your brain literally thinks you're about to die. That's why the feeling is so horrific and intense when you get anxiety and panic attacks. But it's not that severe, is it? I remember the therapist saying to me, can we agree then that in our society, in the position you are in your life, that it's very rare that there's a clear and present danger to your life, and therefore you have time to reflect, allow yourself to calm and to go again. And that was profoundly transformative for me because that's really helped me turn a corner in terms of not waking up in fight, flight, freeze and being able to just quieten the nerves that the cortisol in my gut brings on in the morning. And that's, again, it's been changed. But by being vulnerable enough to talk about that with you guys, people have come out of the woodwork, people have suggested things, people have admired that bravery, and it's inspired the ability to be brave in them too. When I think of building tolerance of the unknown and accepting the possibility that no returns for our efforts takes time, but it's an essential endeavour, then you sort of go, okay, that I have to feel some fear here. I have to feel some apprehension and some uncertainty, but I can walk through it. And there are things on the other side. Think of Liz Atkin sketching on the trains on a much earlier episode. I think early doors, 20-something, I think. Liz was an artist in London I met. We both lived in Crystal Palace. And she had skin picking disorder, which I'd never heard of, but it's really common. And she would, damage her skin picking at it, and it's a compulsion. But to handle that, part of her thing was art. She would draw in charcoal on the free Metro newspapers on the London Underground trains in the morning and give them to the commuters, and it would spread such joy throughout the carriage, and it became such a thing for her that she ended up being invited out to Singapore to do it and other places in Asia and all around the world, and it helped her to build her anxiety, her identity. So those anxieties that led to skin picking disorder were not only tempered somewhat by the physical act of the art, but then the joy and the connection around it was further distraction, engagement, beauty. It spread inspiration among people. I think of journeys over the course of these 300 episodes, Murugaya and Dirty Freud and Craig Black, all people who have evolved from the first interview I had with them to the follow-up. Now I know I haven't had Craig back on the show to talk about his recent progress, but to have seen the original acrylic fusion piece in his portfolio and being drawn to that and highlighted it in an interview with Craig, and him to tell me that was the thing he felt strongest about too. And then to see him over 10 years become such a household name now as an artist doing this. He did the FA Cup final here in England in the football a few weeks ago, decking out Wembley and, the backdrop for the trophy and where the players come out. And as someone who had a very promising professional football career curtailed by a bad injury, but then turn that to his artwork, to see him succeeding in sport and in football is a real joy because Craig's a lovely, lovely man. And I we've shared again many times together. Murugaya going from lots of doubt over how rigid his work had become and how controlled, but how he wanted to tap more into this surreal aspect of some of his personal pieces, and then to see him become what he's become today, his upcoming exhibition at the new illustration centre, the Quentin Blake Illustration Centre. It's just so invigorating, and that's what I get out of my coaching work too, by seeing progression in my clients. Dirty Freud to go from untrained DJing, learning on the fly when we were doing quenched music in Manchester, to now writing operas and, having played Glastonbury and all of these incredible things. And it's not a big success story either. I know Danny very well. He's one of my closest friends. I know the personal struggles going on there. He gets the same ups and downs as any of us freelancers. But to see all of those guys making massive progress over time through this podcast vehicle has been absolutely magic. So many great relationships. To have seen the AI meltdown, that how it's coming for all of our jobs and how it's going to finish everything, and it is going to be totally transformative, and it's a revolution for sure. But again, it comes down to story and why you absolutely should do the thing that you might be putting off in your brain right now, because human stories are going to be what is going to keep us going through this automation. So a lot has happened over 300 episodes, but the human condition really hasn't changed. My continued archaeological dig continues, and it's likely that I'll do it as long as I'm able, and I want this work to go way beyond my lifetime. I think beyond my lifetime when I do this work. This is what I'm here on earth to do. That's what I truly feel like. And if you've ever read Marcus Aurelius or any of the Stoics, it's about finding the directing mind's work. What is it that you're drawn to? What is it you can contribute to here on this earth? Do the work. Be present. Don't worry about things outside of your control. Go back and listen to the episode with Owen Smith. We got into Stoicism again, that vulnerability. I'd shared a piece about anxiety on LinkedIn and how Stoicism had helped me to start to consider what I could control and what I couldn't. And Owen, commented on that and I said, well, do you want to have a chat on the podcast about it? And we had one of the best episodes that I've done in this 300. As I keep saying, it's actually way beyond 300, but they're the numbered episodes. It's in truth, it's over 400, and but it's all, the numbers are kind of arbitrary. It's been the time spent growing and learning that we should all do through our personal work. It's led to story coaching, book writing. I wrote Hector Ayuso's biography, founder of Off Festival, the biggest design festival in the world, now founder of Paradiso Institute, incredibly exciting new venture. It was his trust that threw me in the deep end with writing a biography, and it went incredibly well. They then commissioned me through Paradiso to write Pablo Honey's memoir. Turns out I wasn't writing Pablo Honey's memoir. I was book coaching because Pablo's a competent writer, and once I would write up the stories that I'd extracted from him, that was my skill on this project, my main role, to talk to him in a way that unlocked him and got those beautiful stories that sometimes quiet people struggle to part with. To then do that and then to coach him through his own writing process has been magic and a real ego death in the best way, because I got so immense creative satisfaction even though I wasn't writing the story. But the book and story coaching is now an offer moving forward that I would love to talk to you about if you think that's something attractive. I have an offer called The Internal, which is a program help you to write your life story, to reframe it, to reconsider it and use it as a compass moving forward so you can become the author of the life you want to live. Alternatively, The External, which is the book process, the book or the content. I helped PJ Richardson write his new talk that he debuted in Toronto and then at DDD in Milan, and to see him on stage giving that talk, knowing that we'd worked on the narrative arc of that together, was incredibly empowering and exciting. I think of Olya Protasova, the bravery of that woman, the bravery of Adelaide Demoa. So Olya is a Ukrainian artist, illustrator and activist who is helping to facilitate conversations out of Ukraine in this time of war. And to do that, we opened our conversation with her saying, you can't just sit in a damn bomb shelter all day. You have to go out and make. That's what we are. We're humans. We have to stay inspired and optimistic in some way, even when there are bombs falling around us. And you can't undervalue bravery like that. Adelaide, she talks about racist abuse in younger years, going on to become an incredibly empowered artist by being bold enough to step away from just painting and then getting into performance pieces, channeling her Ghanaian heritage and that of her ancestors. So, it's just unbelievable. Into the mind of the colonizer. Such powerful performance pieces. Go and have a look at Adelaide's work. So many brave people. I went away and wrote a story about the Hockney soldier. That's what I named him. It was somebody who tragically in Kiev had come in and dropped all of his art and design book collection in a second-hand bookstore because he was going to fight on the front line in the war that his country did not start. And it broke my heart in some ways. And there was a David Hockney book in the pictures that I was sent by the Ukrainian Institute who helped support me in writing that story. And seeing Hockney in there, who's from Bradford, where I'm from, just down the road. I'm from Keighley, which is a part of Bradford. And to see that and know that that man was having to go and fight and might not return, that just rocked something at my foundation. So I wrote a story which you can read at bentalonwriter.com called The Hockney Soldier, all a part of this exploration through this podcast. So my curiosity, despite the anxiety that I've suffered over the last few years, is alive and well. It's a part of my story and my cause. Following these passions and allowing ourselves to ask why not before having a go helps us to learn who we are, to do the work we are the best person in the world to do. I've nearly quit several times. Of course I have. This is an 11-year endeavour. Do any job for 11 years and you'll think about quitting or moving on. When things got busy in my life, it felt challenging, but it's just too well suited and too well aligned with who I am to not do this work. Personal work, we must all be doing it. If you're not making time, if you don't have the capacity, find the capacity, change things. I remember chuckling when Stefan Sagmeister said, as I interviewed him live on stage in front of 3,000 plus people at our festival in Barcelona, headlined on the Saturday night, one of the biggest achievements of my career and one of the biggest buzzes I've ever had, interviewing a personal hero of mine and a lovely, lovely man. But he said, what was the quote? He said, what was the quote? It was about personal work, but he basically said, that was it. Any designer that I respect, is doing personal work. And I love that. It was the pause before that I respect that I loved, because he's so kind of, not opinionated. We all should be opinionated, but he's not afraid to give his opinion on things, and be very honest. And I think we could all do with a bit more of that. But again, we should all be doing that personal work. It's our directing mind, the work we should be doing on this earth. You learn things about, by being human and staying open. I've always done that. I've been open to pitches the whole time. I've gone ways which I didn't plan because they just felt right, or something happened that took it that way. Getting to talk to that hero of mine in front of all them people was very intimidating, very humbling. I was very nervous as I walked on stage, so much so that I forgot to say my name. But the response reminded me that it can all happen. In the end, it was just a conversation about our causes that creates a group desire. I'm losing the words a little bit here, but I don't know, we need these collective moments. Being on stage there with Stefan and doing that was inspiring and invigorating, and we all come away from festivals, whether you're on stage or just in the audience, it's equally valuable, with a spring in our step, with our tails up, with examples of how we could be doing it. So what's your way? And what are you not allowing yourself to have a go at? Austin Kleon on last week's 300th episode talked about the misconception that action should only come after there's an idea. Not true. He talks about just making a mark the way that Ralph Steadman will smash the page with ink before he even draws anything, and he doesn't know what's going to come out of it until he sees the ink and goes, whoa, okay, that's lovely, let's do this, and then starts doing it. And it's this unfolding action, this process that will lead him to a solution. And I get that too. The blank page is terrifying, but the first splash of ink, the first line that I like, unlocks something and takes me on this unfolding way of doing it. So much to look forward to. Personal suffering has been a real cause, a real driver in this. Like I said, I've talked to many people around the anxiety. I've tried to have mental health professionals on, or people put in a position to share a story. I had Sarah Prinsloo on the show. Sarah and I met through a tragedy in her life. She came to an exhibition of mine that was about identity and self-expression on a day after she'd lost somebody dear to her in tragic circumstances. And something about the emotion I was feeling by being in the midst of this exhibition that had just opened this personal thing of mine, and then meeting someone who'd gone through a personal tragedy, just formed this immediate bond, and we've stayed in touch ever since. Sarah's been on the show to talk about that journey. We connected over being from working class backgrounds and working through our emotions in our artwork. Professor Carl Chin, big champion of the working classes. He's a professor of history specialising in the English working classes. Had him on the show, a real moment for me. Doing the work with Calm before I started the podcast, interviewing people about the emotional benefits of artistic expression. Wendy Dignan coming on, anxiety specialist, coming on my show. Just so many good things. So this fight is mine. It is my battle within the turbulence in this world. It keeps me sane. It keeps me active, imaginative, creative, and full of wonder. What is yours? I want you to know what it is and ask yourself, why not? Cheers, guys. That's enough of the reflections for now. I hope you've enjoyed it. Feel free to jump back into anything in the archive of the show. You'll find it now on the usual platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, I should have said. All of those places, whatever your preferred platform is. And it's also on thecreativecondition.com along with the rest of my resources, links to the coaching. Let's have a chat if you think that's something I can help you with. And the rest of it, drop me an email, we'll jump on a Zoom call, we'll have a chat. No obligation, and we'll see if we're a good fit, and we'll go from there. Thank you to the sponsors of the show, illustrationx.com, paradisoinstitute.org, fileco.com, and ui.org.ua for the Ukrainian Institute. Thanks for listening, guys. Keep the magic. Ask yourself why not. Take an action this week. Do it for me. Lovely. Take care. Have a great week. Stay creative, guys.